So, today we're going to unpack something pretty radical. It's a new blueprint designed to help small, local churches do more than just survive. It's about helping them thrive when the odds are, let's be honest, stacked against them. It's a story about survival, yeah, but also about strategy and a really surprising pivot into technology.
And it all kicks off with this staggering figure from our source. It paints this picture of a megachurch vacuum, basically a Goliath that just hoovers up over 90% of all the resources. We're talking people, money, attention. And that leaves thousands of smaller local congregations, the Davids in the story, pretty much starved and struggling to keep up.
Right, so if the megachurch is Goliath, then what's David's slingshot? Well, according to the book Cross and Splinters, the answer is this new strategy called the Invoke System. And it's not about growth in that old school way. It's about resilience and about making a really deep, meaningful impact right there in your own local community.
Okay, let's dive into the first part of this. To really understand the solution, we've got to get our heads around the sheer scale of the problem. The source material calls this life in the shadows. And honestly, that term perfectly captures the crisis that these smaller churches are facing.
A huge part of this struggle is what the author calls the gobble-up strategy. You see, when a small historic church starts to decline, a much larger one will often just swoop in, buy the property, erase the original name, and just rebrand it as another one of their satellite campuses. And that unique history, that community identity, yeah, it's pretty much wiped clean.
And this slide really shows you what happens next. The author uses this fantastic metaphor of a well-manicured lawn to describe the modern church landscape. You know, it's all uniform, it's predictable, super risk-averse. It doesn't matter if you're in Miami or Boise, the style, the music, the message, it all starts to look and feel exactly the same. It's this kind of spiritual homogenization.
And, you know, at the very heart of these struggling churches are leaders who are just facing incredible burnout. They're expected to be a CEO, a marketing genius, a therapist, and a world-class speaker all at the same time, usually with next to no resources. This pressure creates this deep sense of isolation and this constant nagging feeling that you're just not enough.
But here's the thing. The Invoke system argues that this decline, it's not inevitable. It's proposing a fundamental pivot, a completely new operating system that redefines what success even means for a local church.
And this right here, this is the absolute core of that shift. The goal, or the telos as they call it, isn't about getting more people in the seats or more money in the bank. It's about forming little Christs, just, people who actually embody the values of the faith out in their community. The source argues that this is the real measure of success, and it validates the work even if the pews aren't completely packed.
Now, this slide just lays out the difference so clearly. You've got the old model, evangelism, which is often framed as confrontational. We have the truth, you're wrong, so come to our building to get it. But the new model, Missionality, flips that whole script. It says, we are here to serve you, with no strings attached, whether you ever step foot in our church or not.
This whole idea is captured in the system's central metaphor, the Cross and Splinters Theory. So think of the cross as the big abstract idea of faith. But real impactful ministry, that happens in the splinters, the small, tangible, actually usable acts of service. Things like supporting a local entrepreneur, offering addiction recovery, or just doing a simple act of kindness.
Okay, so that's the big idea. But how does this philosophy actually work for a pastor who's already completely overworked? Well, that's where the surveyor's toolkit comes in. So the role of the pastor gets a complete rethink. Instead of being a CEO trying to do everything, the pastor becomes a surveyor. Their job is to map out the local terrain, find the fault lines, where human pain is really clustered, and then strategically apply the church's very limited energy and resources for the biggest impact. It's basically a form of pastoral triage. And look, this isn't just some vague philosophy. It is laid out in a super clear 12-week roadmap. It takes a congregation on a journey from an honest, hard look at themselves all the way to a final convergence of work, worship, and community care.
And this is where the story takes a very 21st century turn. The creators realized that, to make this blueprint accessible to thousands of struggling leaders, a book just wasn't going to cut it. It needed to become a technology platform.
So the big strategic leap was this. How do you productize a theological operating system? The answer was to translate the core concepts of the Invoke system into a software application, a tool you could put directly into the hands of pastors who are out there on the front lines.
And this table just shows you that translation perfectly.
It's pretty brilliant, really. The surveyor model becomes a digital dashboard that helps pastors actually see a community's needs. The truth scan, which is a process for being really honest about burnout, becomes an encrypted private place to log that. And the idea of a resource pool, that becomes a peer-to-peer marketplace for churches to share what they have, directly fighting that resource hoarding cycle.
All right, so this brings us to the final and maybe the biggest idea of all. The creators argue that this isn't just about saving churches. It's about building a whole new kind of infrastructure that can help all kinds of local, independent communities survive and thrive.
The term they use is sovereign infrastructure. And really, what this does is it frames the Invoke system and its app as part of a much larger movement. It's all about creating tools that empower decentralized, often overlooked groups to keep their independence when they're up against these huge centralizing forces, whether those forces are corporate or, like in this case, religious.
And man, this quote from their own strategic documents, it just drives the point home. It contrasts the polished corporate world of the megachurch with the gritty, real world of the blue-collar shepherd. The Invoke system is being built as the practical toolkit for these unsung heroes, the ones holding the line in what the text calls the forgotten frontier.
So let's just quickly run through the key takeaways here. First, there's a massive resource imbalance that's creating a real crisis for small churches. The solution being proposed is a huge pivot in mindset, from chasing growth to practicing hyper-local faithfulness. That whole philosophical blueprint is now becoming a real-world tech platform. And at the end of the day, this whole thing is framed as part of a universal struggle for the survival of decentralized, local communities everywhere.
Which kind of leaves us with this one final provocative thought to chew on. In an age where local institutions seem to be fading and digital solutions are popping up for everything, the story of the Invoke system asks a really fundamental question about our future. Can a piece of technology, can an app, actually help a community reclaim its soul? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me.